Thanks so much for having us. We are so blessed to be here tonight. You guys ready for a Bible study? All right, so I'm just going to get situated here real quick, real fast-like. Now, there's no way around it. Everyone knows what today is, right? It's October 31st. It's what is commonly known as Halloween, the celebration of all things spooky and scary, right? Which makes me think of a Stephen King quote. Stephen King said, "I like to scare people, and people like to be scared." Is that true? Do you guys like to be scared? I see some people nodding yes, and other people shaking their heads no. It's kind of funny because, there are lots of people who do like to be scared. In fact, we have, things like scary movies, scary TV shows, scary books, scary rides at amusement parks. Speaking of scary movies, most of us have a long relationship with scary movies, right? Like the first scary movie that I ever saw was The Wizard of Oz. Now, I realize that's not necessarily categorized as, a horror movie. It's not in that genre, but, I was like 5 years old, and I was horrified. My parents tell me that night, after watching The Wizard of Oz for the first time, that I was walking in my sleep, like for a long time, and they couldn't get me to snap out of it. In fact, apparently, they had to do like you sometimes see in a movie or a TV show. They had to resort to splashing cold water in my face to get me to snap out of it. Apparently, I thought I was Dorothy, and I was running from the Wicked Witch. So my dad was like, "He's never watching it again." And of course, I've watched it many times since. So again, I was like 5 years old. But then as a teenager, it was the movie Jaws. Now, for younger people today, that's not very scary because they grew up when, you can't even turn on the TV without Jaws being on 3 channels at once. But man, for those of us that saw Jaws in the theater back in the 70s, it was so scary. We didn't just stop going to the beach, we stopped showering. I think I just started bathing again like a week ago, and that was after years of therapy. And now as an adult, if I want to get freaked out, if I want to get terrified, horrified, really shaken up, I just turn on CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. It's so scary. Now, the reality is that when you and I leave the house in the morning to go about our daily business, who here is really afraid of flying monkeys? None of us are thinking that a monkey is going to swoop down out of the sky and carry us off to a wicked witch somewhere. And I don't think that very many of us are actually afraid of being killed by a shark. Now, I have to admit, the older I get, the more I think about that. I was just kidding before. As a teenager, I still went in the ocean. But now as an adult, I stop and I think about it. Do I really want to take this chance? I don't know why that is. But still, none of us really think it's likely that we're going to be attacked by a great white shark. What about the things we see on satellite news? What about a natural disaster or a violent crime or even, being at the wrong place at the wrong time when an act of terror is committed? Again, we probably think about those things more these days, but none of us really walk out the door feeling a great deal of anxiety that one of those things is going to happen to us that day. But what are you afraid of? Fear is a powerful emotion. Last time we were here, I talked a little bit about fear. I'll repeat a few things I said before, but we're going to dig much deeper into this topic tonight. Fear is so powerful, it will keep you from doing things that you would normally do. And it is so powerful that it will cause you to do things that you normally wouldn't do. And maybe that's why the most common command in the Bible is do not be afraid. Well, let's go ahead and turn in our Bibles to 2 places. The first place I'd like for you to turn is Matthew chapter 14. We're actually going to look at that later in the message and relatively briefly. So that's why I have you turning there first in the hopes that you could mark it so you can come back to it quickly later. If you have a church program or a business card or even a sweaty finger that you can stick between the pages, save that spot and we'll come back to it. But Matthew 14 and then turn to John chapter 6. That's where we're going to really kind of settle in. It's where we're going to start and where we're going to finish. My title tonight is Rethink Fear. Since this is a night when a lot of people are thinking about scary things, I think we need to rethink the whole topic of fear, because it is something that affects our lives. So before we dive in, let's have a word of prayer. Father, we are just thankful, and I know we've prayed already, so I'll be brief, but as we study this story, it happened a long time ago, but it really happened, and this story has powerful lessons, so many implications for us. So speak to us now in Jesus' name, amen. Let's begin reading John chapter 6, verse 15. We want to talk first about being in control. So, verse 15, it says, "Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed again to the mountain by himself alone. Now, when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and went over the sea toward Capernaum, and it was already dark, and Jesus had not come to them. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. So when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. But he said to them, 'It is I, do not be afraid.' Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going." Now, the people were ready to inaugurate Jesus. I mean, we've got the midterm elections coming up next week. TV is like so many ads for campaigns and candidates and all of that. And I don't know about you guys, but like my phone just keeps blowing up with phone calls and text messages and, are you voting for so-and-so? Are you voting for so-and-so? It's enough to drive a person crazy. And in the midst of, all of the politics and so forth, we hear lots about polls and approval ratings and things like that. So understand that at this point in his ministry, Jesus' approval ratings were at an all-time high. Like this was as popular as he would ever be in his time here on earth. It peaked here, and it's actually going to drop off after this. But at this moment, they are ready to take him and to make him king. They are ready to inaugurate Jesus. But this wasn't the right time, right? As followers of Christ, as people familiar with the Bible, with the Gospels, with everything it says about Jesus' first coming and about his second, we know that he came first as the suffering servant, and he'll come back later. He'll come back again as the conquering king. It wasn't time yet for him to be inaugurated as the king. So Jesus sent them away, and he went to pray. I love that about Jesus. There is this romanticized notion of ministry that to be in ministry means to be available on demand 24/7, 365. I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's healthy for the people who are overly dependent on their spiritual leaders. And I don't even think that's healthy for our spiritual leaders. Jesus certainly had lots of time that he spent with the large crowds, and lots of time that he spent, with his 12 disciples, and lots of time that he spent with just his inner circle, Peter, James, and John. And then we sometimes forget that there were lots of times that Jesus went off by himself. He needed time to think and to pray and all of that. So, I always encourage churches, when I get the opportunity to share this message, I always encourage churches to appreciate the fact that their pastor needs time for all of those things too. He needs time with everybody, but he also needs time with his family, and he also needs time all by himself. Churches should really value those opportunities that their pastor has to take a vacation or to speak at another church or to attend a conference and things like that. So Jim, you could give me the $20 in the lobby after the service for that, but no, it's just something I think that's important for us to understand. Now, this obviously is a storm story, and we are familiar with storm as metaphor, right? We talk about like a stormy relationship, or we describe like a stormy season of our life, things along those lines. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times when a storm comes into my life, my first thought is, what did I do wrong? Do you ever do that? Like something bad happens to you and you're like, I knew I shouldn't have taken that box of paper clips from the office. Right away you look for something that you must have done to earn, to deserve, to have brought upon yourself, this thing that has happened. It's kind of a funny thing. The Bible does tell us that there are such storms as those of correction, but a lot of storms are not storms of correction. A lot of storms are storms of protection. Sometimes God allows a storm, a relatively small storm, to protect us from what might have been a much bigger storm. And still other times God allows a smaller storm in our lives to prepare us for a bigger storm that he knows is coming. A storm that we never would have been prepared for had we not gone through this smaller storm first. So again, sometimes storms are storms of protection to avoid or at least to prepare for a greater danger. And you might think, well, God's never done that for me. God's never allowed a small storm to keep me out of a bigger storm. How would you know? You know, that time that, you had a flat tire and so you were an hour late to work, how would you know but that had you not had that flat tire, you would have been in a head-on collision on your way to the office that day? Like, I suspect that when we get to heaven, we're going to find out that, hundreds of times or thousands of times or maybe hundreds of thousands of times, God spared us like that, protecting us from a greater storm by allowing us to be in a smaller one. But the point is just this, that sometimes we're in a storm not because we're out of God's will, but precisely because we are in it. Now, notice in verse 17 it says that it was dark. That's such a great detail. It was dark. Why is everything so much scarier after dark? It's true, right? Like if it's windy during the day, no big deal. It's a nuisance. It's a bad hair day, but no big deal. When it's windy at night, oh, it's so scary. After dark, you're home alone. It's windy. It's so scary, right? It's true. Everything is scarier after dark. If that wasn't true, how could you make a living selling nightlights? And yet there's a whole industry, right? A whole industry in selling nightlights. So the thing is that a lot of times our fear is irrational. When we're more afraid of something after dark than we are during the day, that's really irrational on some level. Thinking about irrational fear, like for me, born in Southern California, and I was living in California in the 70s when we had what is known as the Sylmar quake. I was 5-6 years old, and I remember I was laying in bed, and all of a sudden my door started to creak open, like it was creaking and slowly, gently coming open. And I just thought Mom or Dad were checking on me. That would be a normal thing for them to do. They're probably up a few hours later, and they'd check on the kids before they went to sleep. My sister and I, different rooms. And so I just thought, well, they're checking on me, And so that's what I thought. But the next thing I knew, that door wasn't just creaking open, like it was opening and closing and opening and closing, and the whole room started to rock, and everything on top of my dresser flew off the dresser and across the room. And in my mind, I was certain that every monster that I had ever imagined lived in my closet and under my bed were all coming out at once to get me. That's what I thought. I mean, if there really were monsters in our closets and underneath our beds, why would they only come out at night? Well, the element of surprise. Believe me, if a monster came out of your closet in the middle of the day, you'd be surprised, right? You would. So fear, man, I mean, one of the things we talked about last time we were here is like how universal fear is. We talked about that website, but for the benefit of those of you who weren't here, there's this website called phobialist.com. If you've never seen it, you have to check it out. They've cataloged over 500 phobias. It's like you're scared of stuff you hadn't even thought of yet. It's crazy. Is anybody here afraid of heights? Yeah? See, you're not even raising your hand all the way up over your head because that would be like too far off the ground. Does anybody here have an unnatural fear of needles? Like nobody likes to get a shot or a blood draw, but for you, that's a bad day. Yeah, see some hands. What about like an unnatural fear of spiders? Like for you, that's the real home invasion. A spider anywhere inside the house, right? Yep, I see some hands for that. And who's just afraid to raise their hand in public? You pass. Anybody else? Okay, so I think there's like some more dessert probably in the other room. The rest of us have some more work to do, but you should go totally enjoy that. The funny thing is that, we're so adamant that we're not afraid. You know what I mean? Like we don't want to admit that we ever feel fearful. So we've got stickers on our cars that say no fear. I mean, I don't know that that's as big a deal as it used to be, but remember the no fear bumper stickers, and there were no fear t-shirts, and I'm not afraid. Well, if you're not afraid, why do you have anxiety dreams? Those dreams where like you're suddenly back at school or work or church and it's like totally stressful. Do you ever have one of those dreams where all of a sudden you're in high school again, except you can't find your locker? Or you find your locker, but you can't remember the combination? Or you get inside your locker, but you can't remember your schedule. Like, what class am I supposed to be in? I don't even know. Why do you have stress dreams, anxiety dreams about like an old stressful job? Like for me, I managed this pizza restaurant in the late 80s in San Bernardino, California. And so sometimes I will dream that it's a Friday or a Saturday night. People are waiting more than an hour for their pizza, and they are not happy. Like it is super stressful in these dreams. And it's like I can smell a large combo pizza just because the dream is so real. It's like I'm there, you know. Or you have one of those dreams where, you know, you show up at church or somewhere else and you're not dressed. I mean, that's a nightmare, right? For you and everybody else. I mean, I don't know why we have these dreams apart from the fact that there is like this underlying anxiety, this underlying stress, this underlying fear in our lives. But you know what's funny is that a lot of times when we're insisting, not me, I don't feel fear. A lot of times fear is disguised as something else. Did you know that a lot of angry people are really just scared of being embarrassed? Like, do you know anybody that tends to get angry in social situations that are awkward for them or where they feel a little bit embarrassed? And so they'll lash out at friends or family members, embarrassing themselves and others, and it's just a really difficult thing. A lot of times, again, that person's anger, what's beneath it is this fear of being embarrassed. A lot of driven people are just scared to fail. A lot of overprotective people are scared of losing something or someone. But again, there's fear underneath it. It reminds me of that scene in The Empire Strikes Back where Luke says, "I won't fail you, I'm not afraid." And Yoda turns slowly toward him and says, "Oh, you will be. You will be." And he was, right? Luke was totally freaked out after that. So when you think about your life, you could sort of put it on a timeline. You know, it's like your life has, well, it has a past, it has a present, and it has a future, and so does your fear. Edward T. Welch, in his book Running Scared, says, "Fear could be triggered by the past, react to crises in the present, or anticipate them in the future." So what was it for the disciples? For the disciples, it was both past and future. I need to explain. There's something important that isn't here in John, but Matthew and Mark both tell us that Jesus made his disciples get into the boat. Now, that's an interesting detail. It's like Jesus said, "Okay, guys, get in the boat." And they're like, "Make me." I mean, how weird, right? Like, why in the world were they not cooperating with Jesus? Why did he have to make them get in the boat? Well, see, here's the thing. This right here, this storm that we know is about to happen because we read ahead a little bit, this wouldn't be the first time. The first storm is recorded for us in Matthew 8, Mark 4, and Luke 8. It was about a year and a half before this that they were caught in a storm on the Sea of Galilee. So while this wouldn't be the first time, it would totally be the worst time. Why? Well, because last time they were together. Last time Jesus was on the boat. Remember, all they had to do was wake him up. This time, he's not getting in the boat with them. So a lot of times our fears are fueled by these past experiences. What we're doing is we're reacting and we're responding, to these things that we've done or that have been done to us. And one thing that I've discovered is that in life, you either make peace with the past or you will almost always fear the future. It just sort of goes hand in hand like that. You live with this dread, this panic, this nervousness, this worry, this anxiety. And on some level, it's all about being in control. It's about control. It's about you and me being in control. But here's a secret about controllers. Do you know one of those? Do you know a controller? If you have an elbow in your ribs right now, there's a chance that somebody who loves you thinks that you are controlling. Here's the thing about controllers. Controllers are scared. You loved and got hurt, or you trusted and got betrayed. You risked and lost it all. You opened up and got burned. Something happened to you. Something that you couldn't control, and so you said, never again am I going to give control to someone else. Never again will I let someone else take control from me. But here's the problem. Control is a myth. You can't control anything. You can't control the weather. You can't control the price of gas. You can vote, but you can't control the overall outcome of the midterm elections. I mean, really, we have so little control over things in our lives. And so with that in mind, so many times we settle for the feeling of being in control rather than making the kinds of changes in our lives that, choices that would bring true change. So in talking about being in control, here's what we've learned. First point, we've learned that just because I think that I'm in control doesn't mean that I am. I'm not. Now, number 2, let's talk about being out of control. So we're going to go back to verses 18 and 19. Then the sea arose because a great wind was blowing. And so when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. Now, I love to talk about the Sea of Galilee. In fact, at dinner, we were talking with Jim and Joanne about, the trip that you guys are going to take in 2020 to Israel. If you've never been, and there's any way at all you can go, you should totally go. You're going to see so many amazing things. But my favorite part of the tour is that part of the tour, it's usually earlier in the tour when you're posted up on or near the Sea of Galilee. And I love to get up early, even before the sun if I can, and get my Bible and a cup of coffee and get down there to the shore and watch the sunrise over the Sea of Galilee. I mean, it is the most amazing thing. It's beautiful. It's picturesque. The way it's situated, the Sea of Galilee is nearly 700 feet below sea level. And it's surrounded by hills, which is what creates these sudden storms. What happens is that cold air comes over the region, the warm air rises, the cold air falls, and you have this sudden storm. Now, I have some idea what this might have been like. When I was a kid, my family left California. We spent a few years in Albuquerque and then a few years in Dallas. And when we were living in Dallas, for one season, my dad had access to a sailboat. And he taught himself to sail by reading a book. I'm not sure that's the best way to learn to sail. That's the way he learned to sail. And so it was Lake Ray Hubbard in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so we'd go out on Lake Ray Hubbard. And one night, well, it wasn't nighttime quite yet. It was late in the afternoon. Dusk probably wasn't too far off. But we were out in the middle of the lake. And suddenly, my dad saw a storm, bearing down on us. This is before cell phones. There was no Weather Channel alert going off to tell us anything. And he was like, oh, no, we better get in. I didn't know anything about sailing. As little as he knew, I knew nothing. So I'm pretty much watching him try to get us in. And seriously, it got scary. As we were making our way in, the wind was just blowing and we're getting pelted with rain. And, the water had gone from glassy to just rising and falling and the boat's pitching. And it was never quite to that point where I'm like, I'm going to die. I never quite felt that. But it was definitely getting scarier and scarier. And he must have read the chapter on what to do if a storm comes, because he did get us out of it. We did survive that thing, get out of the water before we sunk or whatever. But he gives me some idea what it might have been like. Matthew and Mark tell us that they were out in the middle of the lake when this whole thing happened, when the weather started getting rough and the tiny ship was tossed. If not for the courage of the fearless crew, the minnow would be lost. Okay, Roswell, you can do better than that. I know you can do better than that. If not for the courage of the fearless crew. All right, that's pretty good. That's pretty legit right there. Roswell represented. You know what? It wasn't even just the wind in verse 18, but Matthew tells us that it was the waves too. So it was crazy. Now, we talked about the tenses of fear, right? Past, present, future. We talked about how fear of the future is sometimes based on fear from the past, but now fear is very present tense. Before they got in the boat, it was irrational for them to think that they would be caught in another storm at sea. What were the odds? Not very good, not very high. But now that they are, in fact, in another storm on the sea, it's perfectly rational for them to be freaking out. Do you think they were mad at Jesus? After all, they're in the surf and he's on the turf. What's up with that, right? And you know what we do, right? When things don't turn out well, and we feel like it's somebody else's fault, don't we blame? Your spouse tells you that you should go this way and not that way, so you go their way, and then you run into traffic. I told you we should have gone the other way. Yeah, that's what we do when we're stressed out, when we're anxious, when we're feeling fearful about missing something or being late for something. Fear blames. But in this case, what is it that they were afraid of? I think at this point, now they're not afraid that there might be a storm. There is a storm. Now they're afraid they're going to die. This is the fear of death now. You ever, you're online, you're on social media, or you're on your favorite news site, and you see clickbait. You see a title that's like, oh, I got to read that. I saw a title like that one time. It was, "Woman Says Being Declared Dead Ruins Life." Now, how do you not click on that? How do you not find out what in the world that's all about? So I clicked on it, and it was the most amazing story. It turns out that this Nashville woman said that her problem started when someone in Florida with her same name died, but her Social Security number was accidentally typed in as that of the deceased. And so that started all kinds of problems for her. Like, she went to refinance her house in 2002, and the mortgage company called her and says, your credit report says you're dead. And then in 2006, she went to file her income tax return, and the IRS refused to process her return because she was dead. Now, I might see that as a blessing rather than a curse, but I don't know your point of view about that. The next thing that happened was that her bank closed her credit card account. And they even sent to her family a note of sympathy saying, please accept our condolences on the death of Laura Todd. I mean, imagine how upsetting that must have been for her family when they saw that note. And they're like, what? They probably tried to contact her right away. So here's what she said. She said, I don't think people realize how difficult it is to be dead when you're not. It just makes sense to me. I'm feeling her pain. I'm understanding her angst. I'm always sharing with you guys these websites like the phobialist.com. Have you guys ever seen that site called deathclock.com? You got to check it out, at least if you're a glutton for punishment like I am. When you go to deathclock.com, it will ask you for your birth date. It will ask you just a few, a handful. You kind of one-hand the number of questions it'll ask you about your health history. Just a few real obvious things that might, affect your longevity. And so you put a few facts in, and then it projects the date of your demise. So, of course, I had to do it. You want to know what it said? It said that I would pass on September 20th, 2038. So that doesn't seem too horrible, right? I'd like to live more than another 20 years. But, that, put me in my mid-70s. It wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It's within reason. It's pretty close to the average life expectancy. It's not bad. But then I realized that there was another thing I could change. There was an operator that was set to normal. So I looked to see what other settings there were, and you could choose pessimistic. So I had to see what the pessimistic forecast was. The pessimistic forecast is that I will pass on July 27th, 2019. Whoa! Wait a minute. That's less than a year. And when it gives you the date, there's another little window here that pops up, and there's like an hourglass type thing, the number of seconds left in your life. And it's counting down. Like your life is disappearing as you're looking at it. It's like, whoa, easy there. Well, then I noticed, too, that there was another option. You could also choose sadistic. So I just shut the computer down and walked away. No, I didn't do that. I had to know what the sadistic forecast was. So I changed the operator and I waited, and it says that I died 17 years ago. September 20th, 2001. Some people might say that explains a few things. I don't know, but I got a different pop-up window that time. This pop-up window said, I am sorry, but your time has expired. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. Like, that ship has sailed, man. Now, the thing is, for us as Christians, we're not afraid of what's going to happen after we die, right? We don't know as much about that as we'd like to, but we know more than enough to feel really good about what's going to happen after we die. But we are a little bit afraid of how we're going to die. It's why we play games like Would You Rather? Would you rather be in a plane that goes down or in a ship that sinks? And, we have all those kind of games that we play, Would You Rather games. Or it's why we use euphemisms for death. We say that someone passed, that they departed, that they're no longer with us. But still, no matter how much we try to soften it, the infamous words of George Bernard Shaw are still true. The stats on death are quite impressive. 1 out of 1 dies. It's true, right? So notice at the end of verse 19, we've seen it a couple of times, but look at it again. It says that they saw Jesus walking on the sea and drawing near the boat, and they were afraid. Matthew and Mark tells us that they thought it was a ghost. This is like so Scooby-Doo, right? It's a ghost. They're just certain that this is a ghost walking across the water to get them. Why would they think that? Well, let's go back to the first storm at sea. If you're familiar with that story, if you remember it, you know that after Jesus calmed the storm and they got to the land, they encountered a couple of demon-possessed men. These demons identified themselves as a legion of demons, this large number of demons. And so Jesus cast them out and into this herd of pigs who all rushed into the Sea of Galilee. Now, Jewish people in ancient times already had a phobia about the water. They already had a phobia about the sea. But add to that this idea that Legion is in the water, you know. It's like Bessie, right? It's like the Loch Ness Monster. Like Legion is living in the Sea of Galilee. So they were certain that Legion was coming back to finish what he started. So that's why they're freaking out. So now their fear, which started, is irrational. What are the odds they're going to be in another storm? Then it got very rational. You are in a storm. You should totally be freaking out. But now it's irrational again, right? To think that it's this demonic force coming out of the water for them, to drag them to Davy Jones' locker kind of a thing. Now, I want you to notice the timestamp. In verse 16, it talks about this whole thing starting at evening, which in John's gospel would be a reference to 6 p.m. By the time Jesus comes to them, it's described in Matthew and Mark as the fourth watch, which in their gospels would be sometime between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., or approximately sunrise. So, in other words, these guys had pulled an all-nighter. They had been dealing with this more or less from dusk to dawn. How crazy is that? And yet, as we read these other accounts, we know that Jesus saw them in some way. There's not necessarily a consensus about whether from his vantage point where he was praying, he could literally see them in the middle of the lake, or whether in a spiritual sense, he could see them, he perceived where they were and what was happening with them. But in any event, it describes Jesus as seeing them even before he came to them. What an amazing thing that is. You know, we think that because we can't see God, that he can't see us. We have a granddaughter in Fort Worth. We're going to see her this next week. You know, this whole tour has been building up, among lots of other wonderful things, to this visit to see our granddaughter. Ever is her name, E-V-E-R, Ever. We're going to get to see her, get to spend some time with her in November. And, I'm looking forward as she grows and as she gets older. I'm looking forward to playing like hide and seek with her. I love it where you don't actually have to get up and hide. Like, I like it when, the child can cover their eyes. Like, Ever can cover her eyes. And I can be like, where's Ever? And then she can go like this. And I'll go, there's Ever. And she'll giggle. And then she'll cover her face again, and I'll go, where's Ever? And then she'll open them up, there's Ever. Again, kids at a certain age, they think that if they can't see us, we can't see them. That's why we can get away with that. But the same thing, it's not true, right? But the same thing is true in our lives. We think that because we can't see God, that he can't see us. But he certainly can see us. He does see us, and he comes to us. So we're talking about all this confusion about the control issue. And the first point, just because I think that I'm in control doesn't mean that I am. I'm not. And here in the second point, just because life is out of my control doesn't mean that it's out of God's control. Is it out of control? Yes, totally. But whose? It's out of my control, not his. So God wants to teach us about the control issue too. That just because your life is out of control doesn't mean that you have to be afraid or allow fear to control you. When he walks out, when she walks out, when the doctor calls, when the layoffs are announced, when foreclosure seems imminent, when the people who would help can't, and when the people who could help won't, we think that just because life is out of control, it's out of God's control. That just because we can't handle it, he can't handle it. That God's not paying attention, or that he doesn't care. As long as we think that way, we're going to struggle with fear. Rethinking fear. We talked about being in control, out of control, and finally, let's talk about being under control. So verse 20 is where we're picking it up. It says, but he said to them, it is I. Do not be afraid. Then they willingly received him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land where they were going. Now, what are you afraid of? What fears are an issue for you? Remember, we said that the most common command is in the Bible, is do not be afraid. It occurs over 300 times in the Bible. And yet, on its face, that's not particularly helpful, is it? Like, that's no easier for me to do because God said it over 300 times than if he'd said it once. And, well, as a parent, I know how little the command has helped my children. 2 daughters. The adult daughter and our 11-year-old who's here with us tonight, when they're afraid to go to the doctor, when they're afraid to get a shot, when they're afraid to get a cavity filled or whatever it might be, how many times for you as a parent or grandparent, how many times has saying, don't be afraid, how many times has that helped? How many times have you said, oh, don't be afraid? And they're like, oh, wow, I feel so much better. Like never, right? You know what has worked for me? You know what's worked with our daughter Des? Is when I've said, Daddy's going to be right there with you. I'm not going to leave your side. In fact, I'm going to hold your hand. She's like, okay, I think I can do that. And we've done that more than once. And she's gotten through it. Now she's just the bravest thing in the world. But it took those times. So me saying, don't be afraid, never helped. But me saying, I will be with you, totally helped. And I love that about this whole situation. You know, when Jesus in verse 20, when he says, it is I, a lot has been made of Jesus taking that name for God, I am. That's a great thought. I could just vamp on that for a while, but you've already heard that. You can go home and read that and Google it and listen to it and watch it online. I love just the simplest thing of all, his presence, his nearness, the fact that he's going to hold my hand, the fact that he's going to be by my side through all of it. I love that. He doesn't promise to protect us from the storms, but he does promise to be present with us in the storms. Now, hold your finger in John, turn quickly to Matthew 14, the place you saved. You already saved the spot. But very quickly, there's this major part of the story that only Matthew tells us. It would just be so weird to talk about this story and not at least give a brief treatment of this one part of it. So Matthew 14, beginning in verse 28, and Peter answered him and said, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. So he said, come. And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. That's the Allen Rigg paraphrase. It hasn't been published yet, but I just thought I'd throw it out there. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? Can I suggest, by the way, that how you read that last sentence says a lot about how you see God? As a younger person, I think I would have read it differently. I think I would have read it like, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? As if he were disgusted with Peter. I don't see it that way anymore. I see a warmth in it. I see an invitation in it. I see, oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt? You know, it's a funny thing because we know that Peter had this competitive relationship with John, and we know that all of the disciples had this really competitive relationship. They got into all these arguments over who was the greatest. They were, always trying to sort of have a backdoor access to Jesus to see if, they could get him to promise them a position one day in his kingdom. And just a lot of that kind of stuff was going on. So, they must have held this over his head. The fact that he sank. That they had to tease him in weeks and months and years to come about, remember that time you sank in the water? You took your eyes off of Jesus. You looked at the waves. You were scared. They had to razz him and give him a hard time about that. But don't ever forget that Peter was the only one who got out of that boat. Nobody else tried to walk in the water. And before Peter sank, he walked. He walked on the water. Before I sank, I walked. Last time we were here, we told a little bit of our story. Miranda and I both some years back on our own went through very painful and public divorces. And after my wife left me and our then 17-year-old daughter, and I resigned at Calvary Austin, I went through just the toughest time. I mean, I was out of ministry completely for a few years and just struggling. I mean, lost my way, just really had a hard time figuring out how to get back on my feet and move forward. And truth is, for me, it was easier to post up at the sports bar and numb myself than it was for me to feel the depth of everything that I'd lost. It was some years before I would really be honest with myself and with God and feel that pain and grieve that and feel that. I managed to put that off for a long time, but that was so unhealthy and so hurtful and so harmful. And I needed the same thing Peter did. I needed people who would remind me that before I sank, I walked, and that I could walk again. That God wasn't through with me, that he hadn't had enough of me. Miranda was one of those people for me. My daughter Lauren was one of those people for me. And even friends like Jim, who in the years since, as I got back on my feet and just opened my heart to what God might do and how he might use our stories and our loss and our pain to encourage other people. And Jim was one of the people who has welcomed us and allowed us to sing and to speak and to just try to share a little bit of our lives in the hopes of inspiring other people. I'm so grateful to all the people in my life who knew that before I sank, I walked, who believed I could walk again, who actually wanted to give me the opportunity to do that and even to help me to do that. And so, if you are sort of sinking tonight, if you find yourself a little bit under the water, man, can I be maybe the one? At least the first one, can I say to you, before you sank, you walked. And you're going to walk again. And I hope you've got some other people in your life who will repeat that to you tonight or this week or this month or this next year. And I hope that you can believe it and that you can receive it. This whole situation, this whole fear thing, just coming back to this whole fear thing, one of the greatest fears, of course, that we can have is the fear that it's over for us. That's how I felt, like it was over for me. That's one of the greatest fears that we can have. But again, so many things that we can be afraid of. And so here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying as it relates to fear that you can ever come to the point in your life when you're just not going to feel it anymore. I promise you, you will. I promise you there are going to be times when you feel fear. But what I am saying is that you can come to the point where though you feel fear, you refuse to be controlled by it. That most common command in the Bible, do not be afraid. It tells us, among other things, that there is a way of being where though we feel fear, we don't have to let it control us. So think about this. If fear is a form of focus, then maybe one of the ways that we can understand that command to fear the Lord is to change our focus from that thing that terrifies us to God who sustains us, to God who strengthens us, to God who takes our hands and lifts us back up out of the water. The funny thing is that here's us. We're like, if I only had a bigger, better boat, if I had a stronger sail, if I had a couple more oars or an outboard motor, But as long as we're thinking that way, we're still trying to be in control. Instead of realizing that I don't have control, I will never have control, but he will always have control. And he steps on board. Picture Jesus, he's in knee-deep water, the splintered oars, the tattered sail, and he's like, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? Storms are going to happen in our lives. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But he prayed for them, he saw them, he came to them. Have you ever prayed prayers like this? Like, oh God, I want more of you in my life. I want to see you more clearly. I want to know you in a deeper way. I want to feel closer to you. I want to be more connected. But don't make waves. Please don't make waves. But what if the waves are the very thing that bring him to us? What if the waves, like they were for Peter and for the disciples, what if the waves are his very entry point? Could you then live with the waves? Could you then welcome those? If the waves are the answer to your prayers, what if that tsunami in your life is in fact the answer to a prayer that you've offered over and over again of inviting more of God into your life? I love how when Jesus enters the boat, they're immediately where they were going. I can't promise you that whatever you might be going through right now is going to end immediately. I can't promise you that when you walk out the doors tonight that thing that has terrorized you is going to immediately be over. But I can promise that when Jesus is in the picture, we are always closer to shore than we think. So in control, out of control, under control. Let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Miranda's going to come back up. We'll close out with a couple songs. Father, thank you for meeting us here tonight. Thank you for speaking to us, Lord. I love the way that you can speak to each one of us, and one thing to one person and something else to another person. It's so cool how you do that. And Lord, we want to receive those things that you've spoken to us tonight. We want to respond to you now. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, before we do a worship song that we can all sing together, I've asked Miranda if she would sing her song, This Is Your Life. Fear can rob us of living the life that God has for us, but we get one shot at life. And so Miranda's going to share that song, and then we'll have you stand and we'll do a worship song together.